Hey everybody, what's up? Hope you're doing great. I've got a cool location for this week's painting demonstration. I found this beautiful field of yellow flowers, and it was a nice warm spring day, the first warm temperatures we had had in a little while. So it really felt good to get outside, and I felt like these yellow flowers were the perfect subject matter for that type of mood. So you can think about how you want. What kind of mood you want for your piece, and try to pick things that correspond with how the day feels. So maybe paint on a stormy day you could paint like a dilapidated barn or something like that. Or you can see my red paint's trying to get away from me here. I will mention briefly that I don't normally paint with my palette vertical like this. Usually I'll lay my palette down on that little shelf in the front of my easel, but I just do this for the demos so that you can see the colors that I'm mixing. And then also I don't normally paint in the sunlight either. I'm just painting in the sunlight so you can see the colors on the canvas, but try to find a way to set your canvas so that it's in the shade, or turned away from the sunlight so that you don't have the sun directly on your canvas, because that's going to make it hard for you to judge your values and your colors when you're first starting out. So across the top of the palette I've got cadmium red light, cadmium yellow light, and ultramarine blue. These are my three vibrant primaries. And on the left I've got burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and ivory black, and these are like my three toned down versions of the primaries. So we'll be talking about that as we go. But I've toned the canvas with ivory black and my medium, which is a mixture of Galkyd and Gamsol. I mix it, 2/3 Galkyd and 1/3 Gamsol, and shake that together and make a medium that I dip into as I go. And then I put on the ivory black, and then I wipe it back off, and I just leave that nice gray tone. And then I can come right back with some of my dark, and this is just a kind of a go-to dark mixture that we're using here. It's the burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and I'm going to go ahead and try to mass in some big shapes. So you want to squint your eyes at this point and just kind of close them till they're almost closed, and then look through your eyelashes if that helps. And I really try to simplify these big shapes out there. So I want to be aware of what I want the painting to look like when it's finished. So I try to picture that, and I really want to have this big dark cedar tree as the center of interest for the composition. So and that's going to be the area in the painting that I want to pay the most attention to, that I want your eye to eventually end up going to. So everything in this painting is going to be about that dark cedar tree, and you'll already see now I'm creating some angles that lead your eye in towards that. And so now I'm going to come back with some darker darks and do these shadows. So we lay in our darks, and then we come back with the same color but a little bit thicker, so a little less medium on the paper towel this time. And remember, I don't want you using brushes until we really get into it. About halfway through we'll switch over to some paint brushes, but in these beginner demos I want you to get started with just this paper towel technique, because it really helps simplify things. And you can see I'm starting to build up what's kind of called like a bow tie composition, or a radiating line composition, where I've got angles that are all pointing in towards the center of interest. So another thing I'm going to be doing is kind of zigzagging your eye through the composition. So you can see now I've got that angle pulling your eye over to the left, and then your eye gets drawn back in towards the center of interest. That's my medium there, and I'm just pouring that into a little cup. You can use a little plastic Tupperware cup or a little glass jar. And again, I'm just working in big shapes at this point, not getting too caught up with details or trying to paint too many things at this stage. I'm just looking at the big design. And you really want to take your time with this. I mean, you can really make or break your picture in the first 10 minutes. So it really benefits you to slow down and sort of think about how you want the eye to move around the painting, and where your big shapes are in relation to your other shapes, your dark shapes in relation to your light shapes. And if you can tie your darks together, that's a good idea. So you can kind of see how I've overlapped the cedar tree and the mountains, and then I've got that darker in the foreground that reaches over there to the left and kind of ties in with that shape. So the better you can tie in your big dark shapes at this early stage, the more effective your design will read in the end of when you get closer to finishing. A lot of times when you went into a museum or a gallery, you can see the paintings that you will most enjoy. You can see them instantly, and the reason for that is because there's an impact to the design. It's usually because the big dark shapes and light shapes were tied together nicely in a really effective way to really pull you in. So now I'm going to go in, I've got my darks and then I did my darker darks. Now I'm going to go right in with some color and start describing some, the general color of areas. I try not to go too dark or too light here. I'm looking for what's the sort of the middle value. So there might be some lighter yellows in the field and there might be some darker yellows out there, but I'm looking for the middle yellow and something that I can work back into with some lighter and darker yellows to create form. So and I'm just pulling a few of those yellow shapes out into the foreground there. And I'll talk more about this, but you really have to be careful when doing flowers, because when you do a couple little brush strokes and they look nice, but if you do them all over the whole canvas, it's going to ruin the effect. So you really have to use reserve. So now I'm using cadmium yellow light, and then to step it back for this distant field back there, I've added a little touch of white and a little bit of the yellow ochre. And that's just kind of, the white is actually cooling off the yellow a little bit, and then the yellow ochre is toning down the intensity. So we're stepping it back. You can see that it's not as hot or not as vibrant as the yellow that's right in front of the cedar tree. Now this is that dark green. It's actually the shadow of where the group of flowers is standing up. They're actually tall flowers, so they're creating a little bit of a shadow there. And I'm using that dark line to really pull your eye into the composition. And notice here I'm going to use the just the general green of the field again. There's some shadowed areas and then there's some lighter areas, but I want to find that middle tone. Sort of that middle value of that green. So these are what's called local colors, and that's the color of an object before it's affected too much with lighter shade. So we go darks, darker darks, and then some local colors, some big broad areas of color. Now this distant field, you see I used some more ultramarine blue in this field, and that blue is going to cool that green off and really step it back. So that's I'm exaggerating that a little bit, and it's creating a lot of depth in the piece, even at this early stage. I'm going to go ahead and lay in some sky here, and instead of starting with blue, I'm actually going to start with a light pink. The reason for this is because there's usually a warm color in the sky too. There's a tendency to paint the sky too cold and too blue, but if you look at the sky, especially on cloudy or sunny days, when you look towards the sun, the blue is going to have a lot of yellow under it, and then as you turn away from the sun, that's going to turn into an orange undertone, and then when you're looking directly away from the sun, the sky is going to have a lot of pink or red in it, and this is generally under the blue. So when you start with the warm color, then you can come back with the blue, just like I'm doing here. This is just ultramarine blue, and I'm letting it mix with that pink, and because the two are the same value, so they're both very light, it works and it fits in. So, and here I'm bringing some darker blue in, and so you'll see how that pink starts to suggest even some maybe some clouds or just some atmosphere that's in the air, and it really gives the sky a feeling of light. So you want to remember that when you're painting your sky. See if you can start with that warm color, warm light colors, and then work that blue or that greenish blue or that cool purple of the clouds, work it into those light tones, and it'll really help you get a sense of light. There's a lot of beginner paintings that they just use that flat blue color, and it ends up sucking all the light right out of your sky. So be aware of that when you're painting the sky. We're still using the paper towel at this point, but we're using less medium and more paint, so you can really start scooping up that paint and smearing it on there. I'm mixing up like a purple that's cadmium red light and ultramarine blue and white, and making this nice warm tone where the sunlight's hitting that distant hillside. And then I can add a tiny bit of yellow to it to gray it up. It'll actually warm it up in areas too. And you can see that I used most of that where the hillside got a little closer to us, so I'm actually pulling that forward with those warmer colors. I'm squeezing out more paint here. You want to make sure you have enough paint out. There's a, see if you can find those 200 milliliter tubes. There's a great company, Van Gogh. Well, they're actually Royal Talons is the company, but they have two brands of paint. They have a Van Gogh paint. That's their sort of budget line, and then they have their Rembrandt paints, and the Rembrandts are they're both wonderful paints. The Rembrandts are awesome, but even the Van Gogh paints are pretty good. And so if you're on a budget but you want to be able to squeeze out a lot of paint and not feel too bad about it, check those out. I think you can get the big 200 milliliter tubes for maybe $10 or $12 or something like that. So it really helps to have those big tubes because you don't feel so bad about putting out all the paint. And so here I'm going back into these. There's shadows back there on the distant hillside, but they're not too dark. I don't want them. If I stare at them long enough, they're going to look dark. But when I compare them to that cedar tree, I can see that they're nice and light. So even though I'm using a cooler temperature here, I'm using a cooler, like a purple color, more ultramarine blue. I'm keeping it in a very similar value as the distant light part of the mountain there. So I'm not breaking up the big mass too much there. And here's more of those little dangerous brush strokes. In this case, you're wiping them on with a paper towel, but this is what I was going to tell you about, where you could get carried away very quickly, and before you know it, you've spoiled it. So a few little things look good, and then leave it alone and go work on a different part and come back to it later and decide how much more you want to do. And here I'm going to mix up a nice orange color, but it's the same value as my green field, so I can actually break up the shape of the green field with this orange, but because it's the same value, it fits right into that area, so you can see that it's not breaking up my value scheme. And again, when I say value, I mean how dark or how light is an area. So if I took a black and white photograph of the painting, how would it look? You wouldn't be able to see much of a difference between the orange in the foreground and the green in the foreground in a black and white photo. And so I'm using what's there, but I'm also creating my own things. So there wasn't that much orange in the foreground, but I did notice some dead grass that was that color and thought it looked nice. Now here I'm going back into the shadows of the cedar trees. It has a real strong purple that's made with mostly ultramarine blue, a little bit of white, and a little bit of the cad red light. And this purple is going to look really nice with that yellow. Those are complementary colors, purple and yellow. So I'll talk more about that in the advanced videos that I'll be offering soon. But there's a lot that can be learned about how to utilize the complementary colors and how they accentuate each other when placed side by side and neutralize each other when mixed. And I'm going to go into all sorts of stuff and teach you how to use those in those advanced videos. But for the time being, I just want you to do what feels right and experiment with the colors and just play around with different combinations of colors and see what you like. That's the best way to learn. It's not part of those cedar trees, but it was a warm green. It had it was made with the ultramarine blue and the cadmium yellow light, nice vibrant green, and then I added some cadmium red light to it to warm it up and dull it down a little bit, so we get a little warmer green that's more indicative of the color of those cedar trees with the pine needles getting hit by the sun. And now we'll switch to the paintbrushes. So again, I use flats, bristle brushes, You can use variety of sizes, but try to stay away from the tiny brushes right now. In these beginner videos, I really want to encourage you to paint big and use big brushes. So try to keep your canvases big. I think this is a 20 by 24, and that's probably a number 6 brush or so. And look how I'm using it. I was actually scumbling, where I'm laying it flat across the canvas and scraping it a little bit with not a whole lot of paint on it, that feathery edge to that hillside. And there's so many different ways that you can use a paintbrush, and different ways that you can get the paint to come off the end of the brush. So I want you to experiment with holding it different ways, loading it up with different amounts of paint. You try here, see how I'm holding it all the way out at the end of the handle here. This is going to make for some very expressive brush strokes, because what happens is you get a little bit more leverage on the brush this way, and so you're pushing more paint out of the end of the brush. So you're not going to have that if you're holding it up close to the metal part, the ferrule of the brush. It's not going to give the same type of grip. So just experiment and play around with it, and don't get in the habit of grabbing it like a pencil every single time. Here I'm coming back and restating some shadows now in this foreground field. So if I had gone in with too dark of a green in the beginning, then I wouldn't be able to push these shadows a little darker. So but notice that I'm constructing the shadows to point your eye in towards that cedar tree. So I'm still conscious of that bow tie composition. And see how those angles, I've created these angles coming up from the left bottom corner pointing towards the cedar tree, and I've got an angle coming up from the bottom right corner pointing towards the cedar tree. And you can see how those angles are balanced in the sky by having the same shape but reversed. So the clouds, or the warmer tones in the sky, are actually pointing your eye down into the cedar tree. So this is creating a lot of nice stability in my composition because there's balance. That's another thing in the advanced classes. I'll talk more about some what's called design stems, and these are certain ways that you can orchestrate shapes to create balance, and there actually is a science to it, and you can play and modify these design stems, but there's a handful of design stems that you can build your compositions around that will ensure that you have a successful design before you even really get too far into the painting. So that's a wonderful thing to know about, because it kind of takes the guesswork out of how to design your paintings. And I'm really excited because I'm going to be working on these advanced videos probably in the next couple weeks. So I should have my first one out in a couple weeks, and I'm going to be doing a lot more stuff. We'll be adding a couple more colors to the palette. A vibrant red and a very vibrant blue, and I'll be talking about how you can use these two colors to really expand on the range of possibilities. And also I'll be teaching more about color theory, design. I'll be talking more about how to use a brush from the beginning, and finishing, and kind of taking the paintings to the next finish. So in these beginner videos, I'm really stressing just simplicity, basic shapes, and kind of leaving it unfinished. But in the advanced lessons, I'll be going more into how to take your paintings to that next level of finish, and how to play with different degrees of finish, and everywhere from abstract levels of finishing a painting to a more detailed and more specific level of finish. So I'm really excited about doing these, and like I said, I will definitely post a video about them when they're available, and you can get on there and check that out. So look forward to that. And another thing I'm excited about is my wife Jennifer, who also paints. She's going to be doing some time-lapse demos, and we'll be doing some compilations of our artwork. Features a slideshow of both of our artworks, so you can see some of the stuff that she does. And she's a wonderful painter in her own right, and she has some similarities to me in style, but also has her own thing going too. So I think it would really benefit everybody on the channel to see how she goes about tackling some of these problems. So it's all really exciting stuff that's coming up. So welcome to all the new subscribers, everybody that's recently subscribed. We're getting really close to 2,000 subscribers, so that's exciting. And I really love hearing from everybody. If you wanna send me pictures of what you've been up to, if you're watching the videos and painting, you can send them to Kyle j.buckland@gmail.com. I'd love to see what you're up to, and it's really heartwarming to know that I'm actually, helping, that so many people are benefiting from the videos. And I've heard from so many people who had never painted outside and are just getting started, or even people who had painted for a while but kind of needed a little push in the right direction, and it's really made some stuff click with them. So it's really exciting. It makes doing these videos that much more fun, because I know that I'm actually helping people learn to paint and really learn to express themselves with paint on canvas. So you can see here I'm coming back with some detailed stuff, but not too much. So we're taking it just to that little that sweet spot for these beginner demos. So I don't want you trying to do too much. Again, here we go with some little shapes in the foreground, but I'm not overdoing it. I'm not trying to get in there and draw blades of grass. You can see I'm not trying to draw branches around the cedar tree. I'm still just thinking about things as how would it look if it were made out of paint. That's what I say. A lot of artists will try to make their paint look like the subject matter. I think a better, well, not necessarily a better way, but just my way of going about it is to look out there and try to imagine what the subject matter would look like if it were made out of paint, and then tackling that as a and then painting it almost like a world of paint. And I think that's fun, because you're not denying that you're using paint. You're actually embracing that it's big blobs of oil paint, and it creates a very expressive way of painting. Now look here how I'm tying in that yellow in the foreground by echoing little hints of a yellow color in the background. So just the slightest suggestion, but it's light enough and cool enough so it's not a vibrant yellow, and it's also got a lot of light in it, so it's staying in that same value as that distant hillside, but it's pulling your eye around and really creating some color harmony. Your eye loves to jump from similar color to similar color throughout the painting, so it always flow little spots of yellow and little spots of purple. It's one way to create a visual bridge for the eye. And see how I'm using colors that are already on the palette too, so I'm not having to mix a new color every time I come back in. Here I'm just mixing up some more purple that'll help complement that yellow. This is why it's important to lay your colors out way every time. Eventually it'll become like a musician who knows where all the keys are on the piano without having to think about it. You won't have to think about how to get mixtures of colors eventually. If you do this enough and you lay your palette out the same way every time, eventually you'll get in the habit of just knowing where that color is when you need it and being able to grab it and mix up the color you want. And I know, there could be a learning curve to this, and color mixing is tricky in the beginning, so don't get discouraged if it seems like it takes you 2 or 3 tries to get the color that you want. And don't be afraid that you're wasting paint, because it's all part of the process. So there's not really any paint that can be wasted, as long as you're applying, what you're learning and trying different things out and trying to mix colors. Even if you paint a bad painting and scrape it out, none of that paint is wasted, because it takes the bad paintings to get to the good ones, and it takes the bad color mixtures to get to the perfect color mixtures. So don't be discouraged. And here's more of those little dots, and where I'm just again, you can get carried away with this because you do a few of them and it looks really good. It adds all kinds of depth to the foreground. But now if I started doing all those brush strokes all around the whole foreground, it would just clutter it up and it wouldn't have the same effect. So now it just came to that point where I felt like, okay, I want to stop this thing before it gets too much too finished. I'm trying to keep that real broad look in these beginner demos, and I think that would be a great thing for you to learn, is to start a lot of paintings, and don't worry about underworking them, because you can always come back in if you want and take things to the next level. But once you overwork something, you can never get that fresh, spontaneous energy back. So I don't usually use small brushes, but in these beginner demos, but I will keep one handy for signing the painting. So you can see that's just a round craft brush, and I think I was trying to scrape it in with the other side and it wasn't working, and then I mixed a blue in there and I didn't really like the color of that, so I'm going to paint it out right here and start over. Make sure you take your time and get your signature how you like it, because it'd be nothing worse than have a painting you like and then sign it and not like the way your signature looks. So don't be afraid to try a couple times and get your signature. Even if I remember when I first started painting, I got out a canvas and I just painted my signature a bunch of times just to see if I could get used to painting it. I'll have this piece available on my website along with the other demos. I'll probably get this one up later on today, so you can check that out. It's in the description below. It's my fine art website. It's kylebuckland.com. And then also down there I've got a link to my Patreon page, and we received a couple new patrons recently, so I really appreciate it. Big shout out to all my patrons. If you want to go on there and check that out, you can follow that link, and we'll get on another demo probably next week, do another beginner demo, and then also I'll be working on the advanced level demo, and we'll have that released in a few weeks. So really looking forward to that. Appreciate everybody for watching. Tune back in next week for another free demo, and I'll have the advanced level classes available soon, and I'll definitely put a video up about them and put links. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Kyle Buckland. And again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.